I'm Sergeant Ramsey. Listen, we had a report of a disturbance at your house, and there were shots fired. Is your husband Michael? Okay, I'm sorry to tell you, man. He's been killed. He's been killed, man. Listen, try to calm down. Right now, we need to get you. We need to get you to the police station. I can't let you in now. We have to do our job. You have to find his killer, okay? We need you to calm down. I need you to go with these kids. If you want to help your husband, you need to go to the station with these gentlemen. Thank you, guys.
I want you to quit your acting and get this over with.
I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I'm not. I didn't do anything, please. I didn't do anything.
Since you're the wife, we got to advise you of your rights, so you know. Okay? First of all, let me just tell you, I'm sorry for your loss.
I just want to see my husband, please.
All right, honey.
I love my husband. I love you, too.
No, you don't want to see him.
I just want to see him.
Believe me, you don't. How long have you guys been married?
Not even a year.
It's tragic. Is there anybody you could think of that would want to do this to him?
I just been on probation.
For what?
He's for stock fraud.
Stock fraud? Was you spending time in prison?
2 years in prison and 5 years on probation, going on to 6 years.
Oh my God. And what was that for?
It was for taking money. So it was a lot of money. It was $191,000 that he had to pay back. People weren't happy that he was getting on probation because it's a lot of money he's got to pay back.
She switched from being extremely upset to very businesslike. She seems to have sort of a clear, developed theory as to why this might happen. You know, that's a little puzzling.
You're lucky you went to the gym.
We were supposed to go to the gym.
Oh, both of you were supposed to go?
Every morning, 5 a.m., we're both at the gym. Yeah.
You got a lot of, that's better than me. I wish I could go, obviously.
Well, you know, he's very, he used to be a drug addict.
What was his drug of choice?
Crack.
Crack? Yeah, it'll do it to you.
And, he's recovering alcoholic. And so with him, it's very important to be, like, on a schedule.
She's making sure that the police understand that he was a shady guy, to direct their attention away from her and start to consider the world that he inhabited.
I think that's what raises, for me, an eyebrow, suggesting that her husband is someone that many people might want to kill. It's a peculiar narrative to have for anybody.
I don't know if you know, he was shot. He was shot twice. And I want you to know all this.
Do you know this?
Did they tell you out there?
Not exactly. I mean, they told me he was shot.
When the officers got the doors wide open, they went in and looked. And he was found in the bedroom. He was shot twice in the head. Was he asleep when you left?
No, he was just laying there, and he set the alarm, you know. I said, you know, I'll bring you coffee on the way home, and, you know, normal.
I want to see if the house was burglarized.
Okay.
All right, just hang on one second.
Thank you.
You want to wait here? You close the door, please.
For the psychopath, the goal of turning on and off is to manipulate and impress the viewer.
She's very skilled, and she missed her calling. She could have been an actor because she can cry and command. She seems to have some mastery of her emotions, and not everybody does.
Hey, what's up? Huh?
Honestly, you worth seriously killing over that much money?
It's not even about money. Like, you know that money. We'll spend it like a blink of an eye. Like, it's about like his friends and all that other like me going and filing for divorce. Like, he'll come after my ass. Period.
This guy, this is all he does. He doesn't want nothing to do with you after.
Good.
Okay? And he might tell you, it's like to get out of town or something for a day.
Yeah, but the problem is that I never go out of town. Or I'll go somewhere else. But
You like an alibi to be somewhere.
Right,
They
right,
can
I'll
verify
go-
when it happened.
yeah, I'll go get my hair done or something, or I'll be somewhere.
It's interesting that she would choose to get her hair done, feeling like he's so worthless that I can spend my time doing something that benefits me. She doesn't like him. I wonder why.
Okay, he's not even gonna collect from you until after he shows you, he's dead. So that's the way he works.
Right.
I'm giving him the deposit, doing
I brought
making nothing up.
1,200. Like, that's all I brought. Here. Here's.
Okay, after he kills him, like, his mom is not gonna get suspicious of you or anything like
Why
that?
me? Come on. I mean, nobody's gonna be able to point a finger at me.
Well, there's a couple of psychopathic traits sort of running through this, and this complete detachment from the situation and overrating her own confidence in a grandiose way.
Despite the fact that she comes across as a fun-loving, attractive young woman, there are some real deficiencies. But she's sure that no one would ever point a finger at her because, look, I'm adorable.
Hey.
We're staying in Paris.
All right, yeah.
Okay.
Man, he looks good.
Yeah.
First thing first. 3,000. And then, I'll do my thing. All right? Is he your husband or something? Boyfriend? Husband? How have you been married? No, for real, because the thing is, I just want to make sure that, this is what you want. All right? So, sure you want to kill this dude? That's how I'm going to do it. The robbery went bad. Now, once that's done, I'll wait a few days. I'm not going to call you right away because the police going to be all over. Understand?
I'm a lot tougher than what I look. I know you
Okay.
and you're like, oh, what a cute little girl, whatever. But
yeah,
I'm
that-
not.
The whole exchange is so bizarre, it's so inappropriate, but that's part of her performance, to be cute. Female psychopaths are so rare that we can't even put a percentage on it. But female psychopathy manifests quite differently. There's gendering in almost everything.
When she describes herself as a cute little girl, she's really letting you know how she thinks the rest of the world looks at her. But don't let that fool you. So right there, you sort of get the bifurcation between how she presents herself to the world and who she really is.
I was going to get 3,000 from you today, and 3,000 when it's all done.
Right.
All right, Wednesday morning, go to the gym.
Right.
I don't want you at the house. Even if you change your mind, I'm talking to him.
There's no changing, no, there's no, like, I'm determined
Definitely
already.
you wanna do
I'm positive, like, 5,000% sure, like.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, and I guess
You'll hear from me.
I'll hear from you.
All right.
All right, thanks a lot.
Okay.
Bye.
You know who this guy is?
No,
You've never seen him before.
I've never seen him before, ever.
What were you doing coming out of her house? Where's she at?
I've never seen him.
Leave him out here.
They brought into the room the undercover cop who was masquerading as a hitman to see if she was going to admit that she knew him.
She knows damn well she met with this guy. She is unflappable, and she's a good actress. She does have really quite admirable control of her emotions.
You're going to jail today for solicitation of murder. You're under arrest. That's an undercover police officer. We filmed everything that you did, recorded everything that you did. You're going to jail for solicitation of first-degree murder of your husband.
I didn't do anything.
Did you hear what I just told you?
I heard what you said, but I didn't.
Everything, listen to me. Everything has been recorded. You were photographed in the convertible when you sat in his car. What do you want to do? What do you want to do here?
I didn't do
Dahlia?
anything.
Listen to
I
me.
didn't do anything.
You're going to
I didn't do
jail.
anything, please. I didn't do anything.
Tell me you didn't do anything.
I didn't do anything.
You're going to jail today.
Oh my God.
What's going on here is that the jig is up. She's just in the face of reality, just saying, like, I didn't do anything. She set this in motion. So this lets you know how infantile she really is. When you speak to a lot of antisocials or psychopaths, there is an infantile quality, to them. She's not that sharp. She's put her trust in someone. And again, I think it's that self-deluded and grandiose notion that she's a cute little girl.
The role of smallness, cuteness, fragility. In this particular instance, it's to manipulate the detectives into feeling sorry for her and then letting her go.
You better quit your plan. Listen to me. I want you to quit your acting and get this over with.
I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I'm not.
Okay, you know what? You need a real good attorney. You need a real good attorney because we're going to show them the film where you say you're 5,000% sure you want him dead. You think I made that up? You think I made that up?
Oh my God.
He's alive.
Come here, please. Come here. Mike, come here.
witnessing a game show from hell. Basically, this whole thing was a setup. And of course, the police knew that. She didn't.
Mike, come here. Come here, please.
She's asking him to soothe her. Not like, I need to explain myself or I need to apologize for this whole thing. But it was like, come here, you know, come rescue me. But I guess Mike wasn't having any of it.
I think it's not a coincidence. It's really notable that she met her husband while escorting. One of the requirements of a woman who escorts is that you have to shut down your own feelings in order to become whatever the fantasy is of the client. And so detachment and performance go hand in hand.
Hello?
Hey, it's me. Please come here.
Listen, I don't want to fight with you. Honestly. I can't help you.
Mike, please, I need an attorney. Can you please help me? That's not true.
Okay, what said you wanted to have me killed? I heard that.
How can you believe that?
I heard your voice. I don't understand.
Did not say those things. Period.
I don't know how you're going to actually have the nerve to sit here and lie to me now.
Like, I love you. This is simple. I can't do anything to you. You know me. I didn't want to do anything awful to me.
Know what I'll do? You know what I'll do for you? Seriously?
What?
You sign my house back over to me. I'll help you, Mom, immensely.
I'm not signing anything. I'm sitting here watching. You're thinking about
Now you start having me killed. I just offered to help you, and again, you have the balls to say no to me, which is hilarious considering your situation and considering what the just happened today. All right?
It's my house. The title's in my name.
The minute he says, return my house, her voice just drops into this sort of cold, like, it's mine. She switched out of sort of this performance into an actual feeling, which is, I am entitled to this house. The interesting thing about psychopaths is they're no real person because they don't really have an integrated identity. They just take on the persona that is necessary to survive. And that's why they can be charming, they can be manipulative, they can be all these different things. The focus on the money doesn't make her psychopathic. It's the ruthless determination and coldness in obtaining it.
I had some acting experience, and so we were all going to work on an actor's presentation to put up on social media.
Okay. And so your ex-husband's in on this all along?
Yes.
Your whole goal in this thing was to become a reality TV star? Is that your goal?
It was to get an act.
Millions of people see you, so you become famous and wealthy, right?
Breaking news, a murder mystery emerges in the woods. 3 people are dead. Police are now on a manhunt for the killer, and they are searching across Florida. In a house in Chuliota, police discovered a family murdered. A couple in their 50s and their son in his 30s were found dead. And now, this just in, the prime suspect is a family member, Grant Amato. Officials say he is armed and dangerous.
Tell us what happened, Grant.
I didn't do any of this.
Do you not feel bad for doing this to your family?
I don't know.
That's what I see on the phone, like full picture of.
Yeah, he's like almost balding, right?
Yeah.
He just killed the whole world. It's his family. That was my understanding. The mental thinking of this guy is like my whole family's gone. All the way down. All the way. Here's the plan. If he comes out that door, this is your jobs. Communication. Okay, let's see your bodies. All right, stand by. Get to it. The county detectives want to talk to you, so.
I mean, I have my like duffel bag and whatnot in there. If you guys want to check that.
Yeah, that'll be up to the detectives to talk to you.
How are you?
I'm here.
Hey, we really appreciate you coming over with us. Why do you think we're having this conversation?
I honestly don't know, but I'm pretty freaked out at this point because, I mean, I know like how the situation was when I left.
I mean, you're a smart guy. You know something's happened at your home. You have law enforcement here. You haven't heard or gotten any
Well,
emails.
I mean, I'm just scared as to what the answer is.
Give me a roundabout what you're thinking.
That somebody in my family's dead.
And how does that make you feel if you're thinking that?
I have absolutely no ability to comprehend the words.
He's actually being very concrete. I don't think that he has the ability to experience that empathy. The tone of his voice is strange. It's sort of teletype in tone. It is related to that lack of emotional connectivity, that empathy, that ability to convey emotions to other people and hear emotions from other people. That is a sign of psychopathy in him.
Did you do anything to Cody?
No.
Did you do anything to your mother?
No.
Did you do anything to your father?
No.
You have any reason to believe that anybody else would harm them?
No.
Did you leave the house with your brother Cody looking like that? Or did you leave the house with your father looking like that? Or your mother? Is that how you left your family?
No.
Nobody else went into that house.
Who left your family like this? Tell us what happened, Grant.
No, I didn't do any of this.
They want to get an emotional hook in the person so they can play on guilt, sadness, or remorse, and then get the person to confess. For Grant Amato, this technique is not likely to work. They are trying to tap into emotions that simply aren't there.
Who was the disciplinarian in the family?
My dad. Countless times, my dad would like come up to me and he'd make like me feel guilty so that I would, you know, do everything that I can, like get a job.
Almost like a motivation?
Right. He would just make me feel bad. Like I'm not contributing. Over the past 4 months or something like that, I've been talking to this woman online.
Who's she?
She's, as embarrassing as it is, she's a cam model.
A what?
A cam model. A cam model is like a virtual girlfriend, I guess you could say.
Okay.
Like that type of situation.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the money went to her.
So how much do you think you spent on this?
Probably close to like $200,000, I'd say.
$200,000?
Yeah.
And where'd the money come from?
Money came from me, my brother, and then my dad.
He blew $200,000 essentially on virtual reality that he stole. There's obsession, there's impulse control problems, and there's lack of recognition that in stealing this money, he harmed his family.
He's taking it secretly, which is much more than exploitative and parasitic. So that's more of the psychopathy realm. He's going to use them or their money so that he can get what he wants.
Hello. So, how are you? I've been having a long day.
I understand. You were sweet to me yesterday. So I'll be understanding today.
And what did she charge? By the minute, by the hour?
Minute.
For some reason, I think that you're gonna suffer today. I know you would like to pull me into you, isn't it? But you cannot.
Grant has lost himself in a fantasy. People who suffer from what we call erotomania fall in love with people who don't actually really have a relationship with them. It is more than an obsession. We refer to it as a delusion. Delusions are really beliefs that are firmly held in spite of evidence to the contrary.
Oh, poor baby. I'm so sorry.
No, you're not. You're not sorry at all.
The fantastical, imaginary connection is making him feel alive, whereas when he's being interrogated, he's a shell of a man. The fact that they're interacting where she's non-glamorous is contributing to his delusional belief that it's a reciprocal relationship. He believes this is real, that she is real. He doesn't seem to understand that this is about money. If she were real, he wouldn't know what to do. She would be too alive, too overwhelming, too threatening, too beautiful, and feel that he couldn't perform.
One of the stipulations was, if you speak to this woman again, you're out of the house.
What we're looking at is an itemized list of issues and rules that the family would like him to adhere to. Current Grant responsibilities. A, get job. This is absolutely a threat. O's family apology, and in parentheses, we don't expect due to lack of real feelings. I believe the family noticed the signs of psychopathy over the years, that lack of genuine connectivity, a follow through with what he would say he would do.
You know, it wasn't really my intention to continue talking to this woman, but it just kind of happened. And then because there was like that emotional connection, I guess you could say, between her and me, like I it felt like a relationship.
All right, Sylvia, look at me. I am outside going to check the mail. And I'm asking you if you can please, pretty please, send me one of your videos. I love it so much when you just send them to me. Yeah, I don't like buying your stuff. It makes me feel weird. Could you please send me one though?
He wants a free video because he doesn't have any other way to get it. He doesn't have money, but also because then it would be evidence that Sylvie truly loves him and that it's not a fantasy relationship, it's reciprocal. The key thing here is he's not able to attach to real people, and this is only possible in a virtual way.
I don't know how he found out, but he had apparently found out, and then he kind of, pulled me up from the couch, and then he was yelling at me to pack my stuff and just get out of the house.
And then what?
There was an argument when Cody had gotten home.
And then when you left Cody, what did he say he was going to go do?
Cody said that he will take care of it.
So if anything happened in the home, to bring law enforcement there, what would you think happened?
That there was a shooting.
Between whom?
I don't know. Between Cody and my dad.
You're seeing somebody expressing a pretty psychopathic trait. I'll just throw my brother and the family under the bus, even though I killed them. There's no empathy there.
This is consistently being driven by a delusional belief that he's going to get back together with Sylvie. It's a very cold move in the name of love.
Factual items do not support what you're saying. Didn't fire a gun, didn't fire a gun, didn't fire a gun. None of them did. If these two got in a shooting, we would know. We would know they shot each other. We'd know that.
I don't have the answer for anything else.
You don't show the remorse that you should for someone who's lost 3 family members? Body language, eyes, and demeanor.
My brother even said the same thing as when all this financial stuff was happening, why I couldn't show, sadness towards him. And, I just don't know what else to say.
Do you not feel bad for doing this to your family?
I don't know.
The frustration when the policeman's sitting there is that he can't believe it. When you meet with someone who has psychopathy, it's as if part of us refuses to believe that someone could be so callous and so uncaring. That's what the policeman's responding to. And that's what we see and feel with people who have psychopathy. There is no human glue. There's no emotional glue that connects you to them.
The detachment is interesting to me. And this detachment seems to have carried over into his rage in a sort of a tool, if you will, that let him plan and carry out this murder.
So, I take it you know what happened. I'm gonna ask you plain out. You are not part of it anyway.
I don't believe you. And I probably will have resentment for the rest of my life, whether you did it or you didn't do it, but I need closure. I need to know what happened to my mother, my father, and my brother Cody. Because I wasn't there to help. And that hurts me. That hurts me a lot, man.
I understand. I mean, I really do. I understand all your thoughts and what you're thinking and everything, and this is just... You know, I know what I did to everybody over the months and everything like that.
He seems to have slipped up when he said, I know what I've done to everybody. Then he catches himself. He can't forgive his family because he blames them for ruining his fantasy love.
It was not fair that Mom, Cody, and Dad's life were taken. They did not deserve it, no matter what feelings were felt by anybody. They were good people.
I know. And they showed it by protecting me all the time.
I don't feel like we're getting anywhere, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't feel comfortable with you staying with me. You already made the decision on whether or not they can live or not. That's not your job. Alright, I'm ready. I do love you, though. Just remember that. Just like Mom, Cody, and Dad loved you. Nobody loves you any more or any less.
We should not take it for granted.
Yeah.
The verdict is finally in.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree premeditated murder.
Grant Amato was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. The state successfully argued that he murdered his family over his love for a webcam model, stealing about $200,000 from them to pay her.
The call came in before dawn, the kind of call that doesn't ring so much as cut through sleep, and when officers arrived, the street was still holding its breath, wet cobblestones reflecting the yellow pulse of streetlights, a city between eras, Berlin barely stitched together again. And inside a narrow apartment on the 3rd floor, the air smelled of iron and cold coffee, and something else no one ever forgets, a silence too complete to be natural, a woman lying on the kitchen tiles as if she had simply decided to stop moving, eyes open, one shoe still on, the other missing. Radio humming a morning news bulletin about reunification and rising rents and hope everywhere except here. Her name was Anya Keller, 34 years old, archivist by trade, meticulous, punctual, known to neighbors as the woman who watered the stairwell plants when no one else bothered, and within minutes the headlines were already forming in the minds of editors across the city. Berlin woman found dead, no signs of forced entry, mysterious circumstances, words that would soon harden into something colder, something heavier, a cold case waiting to be born. The apartment told a story that refused to settle into a single tense. The table set for one, a half-peeled apple browning on the counter. No struggle, at least none that shouted. No weapon in sight. The door locked from the inside. Windows closed against the November air. Police photographed everything, tagged everything, whispered theories that evaporated as soon as they were spoken because nothing fit cleanly, and in crime, clean is comforting, messy is manageable, but this was neither. This was wrong in quieter ways. The coroner would later say the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the back of the head, delivered with precision, not rage, a single decisive blow, time of death estimated between 11:00 p.m. and midnight, while the city outside was busy learning how to be whole again, bars filling, trains running late, people celebrating or arguing or simply trying to sleep, and somewhere in that blur Anya Keller stopped breathing. The building's residents gathered in the stairwell as police sealed the floor, faces pressed together by curiosity and fear, neighbors who had shared walls but not secrets, and every one of them said the same thing in different words. She was quiet, she was kind, she kept to herself. She had no enemies, and that was the first problem, because crimes without enemies tend to grow shadows. Detectives combed through her life the way Berlin itself was being combed then, looking for fractures, old lines, anything left unresolved. Anya had grown up in East Berlin, studied history, specialized in municipal records, the kind of work that involved dust and patience and documents no one else wanted to read, and after the wall fell she kept her job, bridging two systems with ink-stained fingers. Telling friends she liked the order of it, the sense that everything, if you looked long enough, left a trace. Her family lived across the city. A mother, a younger brother, a father who had died years earlier. No boyfriend, no ex-husband, no obvious romantic drama. Phone records showed routine calls. Bank statements showed nothing unusual. Her colleagues described her as focused, maybe lonely, but content. Content people aren't supposed to end up on kitchen floors. Then there were the first oddities, small enough to miss if you weren't looking for reasons to doubt. The missing shoe, never found. A faint smear of mud near the door, inconsistent with the building's clean stairwell. A neighbor who thought she heard voices late that night but couldn't be sure because in Berlin voices drifted through walls like weather. A delivery slip for a parcel that had never been retrieved. The press arrived fast, cameras hungry, microphones pushed toward anyone willing to speak, and the story hardened into a shape the public could hold. A woman alone, a city in transition, a murder without a suspect. And within weeks the phrase Berlin 1992 cold case began appearing in columns and late-night radio, a shorthand for uncertainty, a warning wrapped in a headline. Detectives worked it hard at first. They canvassed the neighborhood, tracked down former classmates, questioned co-workers, reconstructed her final day hour by hour. She left work at 5:42 p.m., stopped at a grocery store 2 blocks away, paid cash, bought apples and bread and milk. CCTV footage showed her at the register, scarf wrapped tight, eyes on the counter, nothing remarkable except how ordinary it was. She returned home, spoke briefly with a neighbor in the hall, went inside, locked the door. After that, the timeline went dark. Attention turned inward, toward family, because it always does. Her mother collapsed into tears during questioning, insisting Anya had been happy, that she called every Sunday, that she would never invite danger into her home. The brother was defensive, angry at the implication, quick to point out that he lived miles away, that he had his own family, his own problems. Police noted the tension, filed it away, because tension is common and proof is rare. Weeks passed, then months. Leads dried up. Tips came in and went nowhere. A man resembling a former Stasi informant was questioned and released. A co-worker with a quiet crush was investigated and cleared. Each possibility flickered briefly, then died, leaving behind a longer list of dead ends. The case files thickened, evidence bags sat untouched, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the investigation cooled. By the first anniversary, the kitchen had been renovated, the apartment rented again, the building returned to its routines, but the city remembered. Anya Keller became a reference point, her name invoked whenever another unsolved crime surfaced, another reminder that reunification had not erased old dangers, only rearranged them. For detectives, her file became one of those you think about at night, the ones that resist closure, that feel personal even when they aren't. Years slid by. Berlin reinvented itself. Streets were renamed, clubs opened in abandoned factories, tourists arrived with cameras and expectations. New crimes took precedence. Old files gathered dust. The cold case label stuck, heavy and final, as if the story had chosen its own ending. But cold does not mean dead. It means preserved. Waiting. In 2001, a routine audit at the Municipal Archives uncovered a discrepancy, a box misfiled, a set of records marked with Anya Keller's initials in a handwriting that did not match her own. It was logged, corrected, forgotten again because bureaucracy eats anomalies for breakfast and no one connected it to a woman who had been dead nearly a decade. In 2007, a retired detective gave an interview, mentioned the case offhand, said something about doors locked from the inside and truths locked even tighter, and listeners called in with theories, with memories, with accusations, but nothing solid enough to reopen a file officially sealed. And then, much later, when the city had grown used to its ghosts, something shifted. A routine DNA comparison flagged a partial match from evidence long assumed useless, skin cells under a fingernail, degraded, overlooked, suddenly speaking in the language of probability. Not enough for an arrest. Enough for a question. Enough to make old names reappear on desks. The Keller family was contacted again. Polite calls. Careful wording. Time had changed their voices, softened some edges, sharpened others. The mother was older, frilier. The brother paused longer before answering questions, said he didn't remember details, that it had been a long time, and the pauses mattered now in a way they hadn't before. Files were reopened quietly. No press. No announcements. Just a handful of investigators moving through old notes with new eyes, noticing patterns they hadn't noticed before, like how Anya's work placed her in contact with sensitive records during a chaotic period. How her father's past employment intersected with agencies that no longer officially existed. How families carry histories whether they want to or not. The case began to feel less like a random act and more like a collision delayed, a moment years in the making finally arriving at midnight in a small kitchen, and as detectives followed that thought, they felt the weight of it, the implication that the truth had been close all along. Sitting at family tables, hiding in plain sight, Berlin watched from a distance, unaware that the past was stirring, that a story labeled finished was quietly unraveling thread by thread, and somewhere in the city, in a drawer or a memory or a box of papers never meant to be opened again, the answer waited, patient, cold, and sharp. Ready to remind everyone that some secrets don't stay buried forever, they just learn how to sleep. The file did not explode back into life. It breathed, quietly at first, the way embers glow before anyone notices the heat, and the detectives who pulled it from storage felt that familiar unease, the sense that reopening a cold case is less about discovery and more about confrontation. Because time does not erase facts, it distorts them, stretches them, turns memory into a suspect of its own. The evidence was laid out again on a long table under fluorescent lights, photographs yellowed at the edges, labels written by hands that had since retired or died, and there it was, the kitchen floor, the angle of her head, the radio still plugged in. The apple oxidizing in a way that now felt staged, too perfect, as if someone wanted normality frozen at the moment of violence. They started with what had always bothered them, the door. Locked from the inside, no sign of tampering, no forced entry, the classic riddle that feeds bad theories and worse television. But this time they looked closer, measured again, rechecked notes that once seemed trivial. The lock was old, pre-war, the kind that could be manipulated by someone who knew it well, and someone had known it well because Anya had grown up in apartments like this, buildings where keys were passed down through families like heirlooms. The DNA partial match hovered like a ghost in the room. It wasn't a name yet, just a probability curve, a statistical whisper pointing toward a familial connection rather than a stranger, which changed everything because stranger danger comforts the public, family does not. Investigators ran genealogical trees, cross-referenced archives. old employment rosters, population registries from before and after reunification, and the net tightened slowly, deliberately, until one branch kept appearing where it shouldn't. Anya's father, Carl Keller, officially a civil engineer, unofficially something else depending on which decade you asked about. In East Berlin, no one simply was what their job title said. Files suggested he had done consulting work for municipal planning committees, committees that overlapped with security services, committees that kept lists, and lists are power. Carl Keller died in 1984, heart failure, unremarkable on paper, but his shadow lingered in unexpected places, in marginal notes, in signatures that looked like his but weren't, in a private archive box that had been misfiled twice and then forgotten. Anya, the archivist, would have known how to find it, or how to recognize it when it crossed her desk. That idea electrified the room, because it reframed her death not as random, not as intimate, but as targeted, a consequence delayed by years, a debt paid late. The question shifted from who hated Anya Keller to who feared what she might uncover. They revisited her final week, reconstructing it with obsessive care. She had stayed late at work 3 nights in a row, unusual for her. She had requested access to restricted municipal files tied to housing allocations in the 1970s, a bureaucratic maze notorious for corruption and quiet coercion. She had asked a colleague about a particular code used in East German records, then laughed it off when pressed, said it was just curiosity. Historians' habits die hard. Witnesses remembered more now, or thought they did. A co-worker recalled seeing Anya argue softly with a man in the hallway, a man she did not recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, impatient. A neighbor remembered footsteps on the stairs that night, heavier than usual, but dismissed it at the time because Berlin never stopped moving. Memory filled gaps with emotion, and detectives had to separate new truth from old imagination, but patterns began to emerge anyway, imperfect and compelling. The brother was called in again. He sat straighter this time, spoke slower, corrected himself mid-sentence, details slipping where once they had flowed. He admitted his father had talked about his work only in fragments, jokes half-finished, warnings never explained. He admitted Anya had asked him questions shortly before she died, about family history, about people their father used to meet, and he admitted he had told her to let it go, because the past was dangerous, because digging never ended cleanly. That admission landed hard. It wasn't guilt, not directly, but it was proximity, awareness, the sense that Anya had not been as alone in her curiosity as everyone had believed. Police asked him where he was the night she died. He answered, "They checked. It held. For now." Attention turned outward again, to names connected to those old committees, men who had navigated the collapse of one system and the rise of another with uncanny ease. Some had reinvented themselves as businessmen, consultants, landlords. Others had vanished entirely, paper trails ending abruptly in 1990, like someone tearing pages from a book. One name stood out, not because it was prominent, but because it kept appearing adjacent to others, never central, always nearby, a man who specialized in being close without being seen. They found him living outside the city, quiet town, quiet life, the kind of man neighbors describe as polite, private, forgettable. When questioned, he denied knowing Anya Keller, denied entering her building, denied everything with the calm of someone practiced in denial. His alibi was thin but technically intact. His DNA did not match the partial profile, but his nephews might have, and that connection twisted the investigation into uncomfortable shapes because it suggested a favor rather than a crime of passion, a message rather than a mistake. Evidence from the apartment was re-examined with modern techniques. Fibers once deemed irrelevant were now suspect. The mud smear by the door matched soil from a construction site active in 1992, a site linked to redevelopment projects overseen by, again, the same cluster of names. The missing shoe took on new significance, not as a sign of struggle but as a mistake, something carried out inadvertently, a detail that haunted whoever left it behind. The delivery slip resurfaced. A package Anya never collected. Records showed it was sent from a private address, no company name, just a return code that corresponded to an old district office, one decommissioned years earlier. Inside the package, now long gone, had likely been documents or copies, or something Anya knew she couldn't leave at work. Something she intended to review at home, alone. Investigators imagined the moment. The knock at the door, familiar enough to open, urgent enough to trust, a conversation that turned sharp without turning loud, a blow delivered quickly, efficiently, the radio left on to anchor the scene in normalcy. The door locked. The city moved on. As word leaked that the case was active again, the press stirred, cautious at first, then hungry. Headlines whispered about a Berlin cold case thawing, about secrets buried in reunification's rubble. Former officials refused interviews. Lawyers returned calls that had gone unanswered for decades. The atmosphere shifted, subtle but real, as if old networks sensed pressure building and tightened reflexively. The Keller family felt it most. The mother withdrew, canceled appointments, told friends she couldn't relive it again. The brother stopped answering calls. Someone left flowers at Anya's grave without a note, fresh, anonymous, an act that could be mourning or warning. Police photographed it anyway. The partial DNA match evolved, expanded through databases that hadn't existed when Anya died, connecting dots across generations, suggesting a lineage of silence, a family tree with rotten roots. Still, it wasn't enough. Not yet. Cold cases demand patience and punish haste. And so the investigators waited, pushed where they could, listened where they couldn't push, aware that every step forward risked alerting someone who had already proven willing to act. The case no longer felt like a single murder. It felt like an ecosystem, sustained by fear, by favors, by the quiet understanding that some truths cost more than their worth. As winter returned to Berlin, the city unaware of the calculations unfolding beneath its surface, the detectives closed their notebooks for the night knowing one thing with absolute clarity. Anya Keller had not died because she was alone. She had died because she wasn't. And whatever she had touched in those final days was still out there, unfinished, waiting for the next person to open the wrong box, ask the wrong question, or finally refuse to look away. The problem with reopening a wound is not the blood, it's the scar tissue, thick and deceptive, convincing everyone that what lies beneath has already healed, and as investigators pushed deeper into Anya Keller's past, they felt resistance, not from people alone but from time itself. From systems designed to forget efficiently, from records that had survived regime change only to be buried under progress. Every step forward required unlearning assumptions, stripping away the comfortable narrative of a lone woman killed in a moment of chance, and replacing it with something more deliberate, more organized, more dangerous. They began mapping Anya's professional access, not just what she officially requested, but what she could have seen, what she might have noticed in passing, the peripheral data that archivists absorb without trying. Logs showed she had handled files related to housing reallocations in the late 1970s, cases involving forced relocations, quiet evictions, apartments reassigned under pressure, and attached to those files were names that reappeared too often for coincidence, families displaced. Then later compensated, then silenced. Anya had marked several folders with handwritten tabs, a habit of hers, small, neat notes meant for later review. Later never came. One folder, referenced in an internal memo, was missing entirely. Not misplaced. Removed. The absence itself was documented. A bureaucratic ghost, and that absence became louder than any document could have been. Investigators traced its last recorded location to a storage room accessed by only a handful of staff, including Anya and a senior administrator who had retired abruptly in early 1993, citing health reasons, then moved west without leaving a forwarding address. They found him eventually, living in a coastal town, sunlight and routine replacing the gray density of Berlin. He remembered Anya vaguely, said she was diligent, said he admired her work ethic, said he didn't recall any missing files. His hand shook when he spoke, not enough to be definitive, just enough to register. When asked about Carl Keller, he stiffened, corrected his posture, said he had heard the name, nothing more, and then asked if he was in trouble, a question that came too early to be innocent. Meanwhile, forensic reanalysis of the apartment yielded a detail once dismissed as contamination, a faint fingerprint partial on the radio dial, smudged, incomplete, but positioned as if someone had adjusted the volume after the blow, turning sound into cover. It did not belong to Anya. It did not belong to any registered resident. It belonged to no one in any database. It belonged, effectively, to the past. The idea of a second presence solidified. Not a chaotic intruder, but a controlled visitor, someone comfortable enough to move through the space without leaving chaos behind. Someone who knew when to stop. The precision of the injury, the absence of theft, the locked door, all of it suggested intention over impulse. This was not about taking. It was about preventing. Investigators re-interviewed the neighbor who had spoken to Anya in the hallway that evening. Time had blurred her memory, but one detail sharpened under pressure. Anya had seemed distracted, not frightened, distracted in the way of someone holding information they hadn't decided what to do with yet. She had mentioned a delivery mix-up, laughed about bureaucracy, said she needed a quiet night. The neighbor remembered the laugh because it sounded forced. The delivery slip returned to center stage. Postal archives confirmed the package had been signed for at the building, not by Anya, but by someone else, signature illegible, time stamped early evening. That meant the package was already inside before Anya returned from the store. That meant someone had access. That meant the visit may not have been unplanned at all. Attention circled back to the family. Investigators asked again about Carl Keller's papers, about anything he might have kept at home, about conversations he might have had with Anya before his death. The mother insisted there was nothing, that Carl believed in moving forward, that he destroyed old documents, that he warned them against curiosity. But when pressed about a locked cabinet once kept in the family apartment, she hesitated, then said she had thrown it out after Carl died. Empty, useless. No one believed that. The brother admitted Anya had taken some of their father's papers when she moved out years earlier, said she claimed they were historically interesting, said he hadn't thought much of it at the time. Asked what happened to them, he shrugged, said maybe she returned them, maybe she lost them, maybe they were still somewhere in her apartment. Police searched the storage areas again, found nothing, but the absence rang loud, because paper does not vanish without help. The media sensed momentum and sharpened their tone. Articles began linking Anya's death to unresolved injustices of the East German state, to men who had escaped accountability by blending into the new order. Talk shows speculated about conspiracies, about revenge, about silencing, and while much of it was noise, the pressure it generated was real. People who had stayed quiet for decades began calling lawyers. Others began calling police. One anonymous tip changed the direction of the investigation. The caller claimed to have known Carl Keller professionally, said Carl had once confided fears about a list of names tied to coercive relocations, bribes, threats, disappearances that stopped short of official crimes but ruined lives nonetheless. The list was meant as insurance, leverage in a system that rewarded silence. According to the caller, Carl never used it. He hid it, and after his death, Anya may have found it. That possibility reframed everything. If Anya possessed proof, even partial, it explained the urgency, the secrecy, the targeted nature of her death. It explained why the killer did not steal valuables, why the act was clean, why the goal was containment. The missing file, the missing papers, the missing shoe, all pieces of a single action, retrieval. Investigators cross-checked the anonymous tip against known events. Carl's work assignments, his sudden transfers, his health issues, his death. Patterns aligned uncomfortably well. The tipster refused to meet, refused to give a name, said only that reopening the past was dangerous, that some people had survived by never looking back. The line went dead. The fingerprint on the radio was sent for advanced analysis, not for identification but for profiling, pressure patterns, skin texture, hand deadness. It suggested a right-handed male, middle-aged at the time, accustomed to manual work despite a clean lifestyle. A profile broad enough to fit many, narrow enough to unsettle a few. Surveillance was quietly established on individuals linked to the redevelopment projects of the early 1990s, men who had benefited from rapid privatization, who had acquired properties tied to forced relocations decades earlier. One of them reacted badly to routine questioning, contacted a lawyer immediately, requested all communication go through counsel, then left the country for business, a move legal but telling. The Keller brother noticed the renewed attention and withdrew further, his phone unanswered, his workplace reporting stress leave. When investigators finally reached him, he admitted he had found a box among Anya's things after her death, said it contained copies of documents he didn't understand, names, addresses, annotations. He said he panicked. He said he burned it. He said he thought he was protecting the family. That confession hit like a controlled demolition. If true, it explained why the evidence was gone. If false, it suggested something worse, that the documents had been passed on. Investigators asked why he hadn't mentioned it earlier. He said no one asked the right questions. He said he was afraid. Fear, again, threaded through everything. They tested his story, searched for traces of ash, remnants, anything to corroborate the burning. They found none. Absence, again, speaking louder than presence. As winter tightened its grip, the case pressed closer to something irreversible. Someone had killed to keep the past buried. Someone else had tried to erase what remained. And between them stood a woman whose only crime may have been believing that history mattered, that records were not just paper, that truth, once found, demanded acknowledgement. The city moved around it all, unaware of how close the old machinery was to grinding back into motion, unaware that the Berlin 1992 cold case was no longer just unraveling but pulling at threads that connected too many hands, too many lives, too many years. And as investigators prepared their next move, they understood the risk with brutal clarity. Solving this would not just name a killer, it would expose a system, and systems do not collapse quietly. By the time spring crept back into Berlin, the investigation had crossed an invisible line, the one where solving a murder stops being about the dead and starts being about the living, about who still had something to lose. Meetings were no longer held in open offices but behind closed doors, phones placed face down, notes handwritten and then destroyed, because the detectives had begun to suspect that leaks weren't accidents, that certain questions traveled too fast through channels that were supposed to be sealed. The past was listening. They built a parallel timeline, not of Anya Keller's last days, but of her last discoveries, mapping each document she touched to a reaction somewhere else, a call placed, a meeting rescheduled, a decision delayed. Patterns emerged in the negative space. Every time Anya accessed a housing file linked to forced relocations, a senior administrator logged in shortly afterward. Every time she requested clarification on a code, someone amended a record. It wasn't obstruction. It was choreography. The investigators focused on a cluster of properties in Prenzlauer Berg, buildings that had changed hands rapidly in the early 1990s, acquired at undervalued prices by shell companies that dissolved within years, their assets absorbed by more respectable firms. These buildings shared histories of coerced tenant removals in the late 1970s, cases marked resolved without documentation. Anya had flagged 3 of them. 2 still stood. 1 had been demolished. They interviewed former tenants, now elderly, scattered across the city and beyond. Stories poured out, hesitant at first, then urgent once the door was open. Notices delivered late at night. Visits from men who spoke softly, but carried authority. Promises of better housing that never materialized. Names repeated across accounts, not as villains but as intermediaries, messengers who made it clear resistance was futile. None of it had reached the level of prosecutable crime back then. That was the point. Anya's notes, recovered from a personal notebook missed in the initial search, contained shorthand references to these interviews, dates circled, initials underlined twice. One set of initials appeared again and again, always in the margins, never explained. The detectives matched them to a man now in his 70s, former municipal liaison, still influential in property circles, known for his discretion. When approached, he smiled, offered coffee, spoke nostalgically about rebuilding the city, about difficult decisions made in difficult times. When asked about Anya, his smile faded, not into anger, but into calculation. He said she had been asking dangerous questions. He said some histories were better left incomplete. That sentence became a turning point. It wasn't a confession. It was a worldview. Meanwhile, the fingerprint on the radio dial yielded a breakthrough. A new algorithm compared pressure patterns to a database of prints collected for non-criminal purposes, construction permits, union registrations, military service. A potential match surfaced, low confidence but persistent, tied to a man who had worked as a security contractor in the early 1990s, briefly employed by a private firm handling property transitions. He had no criminal record. He had training. He had the right hands. Surveillance confirmed he still lived in Berlin, quieter now, divorced, routine-bound. When questioned, he claimed he had never heard of Anya Keller. When shown her photo, his eyes lingered a fraction too long. He admitted working security jobs in 1992, but said he couldn't recall specifics. Memory loss is common. Selective memory is not. His DNA did not conclusively match the partial profile, but it came closer than anything before, close enough to narrow the field to a family line that intersected, again, with the same network of names. The delivery slip finally broke open under scrutiny. Investigators tracked the handwriting style to a pool of postal workers active in that district in 1992. Most were retired. One remembered something odd. A package redirected at the request of a municipal contact. No paperwork, just a verbal instruction. He had questioned it. He had been told not to. That contact's name matched one already on the board. As the pieces aligned, the risk escalated. Anonymous messages arrived at the precinct, vague warnings about careers, about reputations, about what happens when you dig where foundations are weak. One detective's car was followed. Another found their apartment door ajar. Nothing taken. The message unmistakable. The investigation continued anyway, driven now by momentum and a sense of obligation that had outgrown personal caution. The Keller brother was confronted again, this time with inconsistencies laid bare. He broke differently than before, anger replacing fear, accusing the police of exploiting his sister's death, of turning family grief into spectacle. Then he said something he hadn't meant to say, something small and devastating. Anya had planned to go public. Not to the police. To a journalist. Someone she trusted. Someone who understood archives and headlines. That journalist was found in Hamburg, older, more cautious, still carrying a notebook from the early 90s filled with half-finished investigations. He remembered Anya vividly, her urgency, her insistence that documents mattered even when no one wanted them to. She had shown him copies, he said, not originals, warned him to keep them safe, then canceled their follow-up meeting the day she died. After her murder, he had waited for instructions that never came, then locked the notebook away, convinced that whatever killed her would come for him too. The notebook survived. Its contents were fragmentary but damning. Names, dates, connections sketched like a map no one was meant to see. Investigators cross-referenced it with what they had and felt the case tighten into something almost complete, the way a knot resists until the final pull. Pressure mounted. Lawyers intervened. Access to certain records was suddenly restricted. A senior official suggested quietly that resources might be better spent elsewhere. The detectives ignored him. They prepared warrants. They scheduled interviews. They moved fast because they could feel the window closing. One night, as files were being copied, a fire alarm emptied the building. It was false. When they returned, a cabinet was open, folders disturbed, nothing overtly missing, but the message was clear. You are not alone in this room. Security footage showed nothing unusual. It never does. Still, they had enough. Enough to bring people in. Enough to make arrests plausible. Enough to finally say that Anya Keller's death was not an isolated act, but the endpoint of a long chain of calculated decisions. As they drafted the final report, the city outside buzzed with ordinary life, cafes filling, bikes weaving through traffic, unaware that beneath its streets an old structure was cracking, that a cold case was no longer cold, and that when it finally broke, it would not break cleanly. It would fracture along every line the past had tried to hide, and everyone standing too close would feel it. The warrants were signed at dawn, ink pressed hard into paper as if pressure alone could make the truth surface faster, and when teams moved they did so without sirens, without announcements, slipping through the city like a memory resurfacing where it wasn't wanted. Doors opened to polite surprise, to rehearsed confusion, to anger masked as principle, and behind those doors lay decades of carefully maintained normality. Bookcases heavy with respectable titles, framed photographs of civic ceremonies, awards for service during transition. All the visual language of men who had survived history by standing just to the side of it. The first search yielded what it was meant to yield: fragments. Old address books with pages torn out. Contracts, missing appendices. A safe with nothing inside but dust and the faint smell of paper that had been there recently. The second search was less subtle. Hidden compartments were found. False backs in cabinets. Envelopes inside envelopes. And there, finally, were copies of documents Anya Keller had flagged, housing reassignment lists annotated in unfamiliar handwriting, notes and margins that translated bureaucratic language into blunt intent. Pressure applied, family compliant, relocation finalized. The names matched the notebook. The dates matched the missing file. The initials from Anya's notes matched a signature on a memo authorizing expedited resolution. The net tightened audibly now, not with drama but with inevitability, and the men at the center of it sensed the shift, their denials shortening, their lawyers speaking more often than they did. The security contractor was brought in again, this time confronted with evidence he hadn't known existed, this time shown the photograph of the radio dial fingerprint enlarged, overlaid with pressure maps, similarities highlighted in cold color. He stared at it for a long time, longer than anyone else had, and then he said something that reoriented the room. He hadn't gone there to kill anyone. He had gone there to retrieve something. The statement hung, heavy and precise. Retrieve what, he was asked.
Documents, he said.
He had been told they were sensitive, that they could destabilize ongoing negotiations, that a woman had taken them home without authorization. He had been told to be discreet. He had not been told she would resist. He described a conversation that escalated quickly, Anya insisting she needed time, insisting what she had found mattered, insisting that people deserved to know. He described a moment of panic, a push, a fall, a sound that changed everything. He described locking the door because that was procedure, because chaos was the enemy, because someone else would handle the aftermath. It was not a full confession. It was a partial truth shaped to minimize intent, but it cracked the case open wide enough for light to flood in. Investigators pressed. Names were offered reluctantly, then more freely as the calculus shifted from loyalty to survival. The chain of command emerged, informal but firm, a web of favors and obligations stretching back into the final years of the GDR and forward into the uncertain early days of reunification. Anya Keller had found proof not of a single crime, but of continuity, of the same men leveraging different systems to the same ends, preserving power by adapting its language. Her mistake, if it could be called that, was believing that exposure would be met with accountability rather than erasure. The arrest that followed did not make headlines immediately. Authorities moved carefully, aware that premature disclosure could trigger legal countermeasures, could fracture a case built on fragile connections. When it did break, the wording was cautious, almost timid. Suspect detained in connection with 1992 death. Investigation ongoing. No further comment. The public sensed the understatement and leaned in. The Keller family was informed privately. The mother listened without speaking, eyes fixed on a point beyond the room, as if the words were arriving from very far away. The brother reacted with visible relief, followed by something darker, the realization that his own choices, his fear-driven decisions, had helped bury the truth his sister died trying to preserve. He asked whether it mattered now. Investigators told him it did. It always did. As interrogations expanded, another layer surfaced, one that shifted the narrative from tragic accident to deliberate containment. Internal communications revealed that contingency plans had existed long before Anya's death, discussions about information leakage, about the need for rapid response if certain archives were compromised. Her murder had not been ordered explicitly, but it had been made possible by a culture that treated human consequence as an acceptable variable. The journalist's notebook became a central exhibit. Its contents, once speculative, now aligned with confessions and documents recovered in searches. He was granted protection, his long silence reframed not as cowardice, but as survival. He spoke publicly for the first time in decades, his voice shaking as he described meeting Anya, her conviction, her belief that truth could be timed, managed, released responsibly. She thought she could control it, he said. She didn't understand that control was the thing they would never give up. Legal proceedings moved forward, complex and slow, challenged at every step by statutes of limitation, by jurisdictional ambiguity, by the simple fact that time had aged both crimes and criminals. Some charges stuck. Others dissolved under scrutiny. The security contractor faced manslaughter charges. Higher up, accountability became more abstract, more symbolic, resignations instead of sentences, reputations tarnished rather than lives confined. The system protected itself even as it acknowledged damage. The press finally found its voice. Headlines sharpened, names printed, photographs republished, the phrase Berlin 1992 cold case reframed from mystery to mirror, reflecting uncomfortable truths about continuity and compromise. Public reaction oscillated between vindication and fatigue. Some demanded more arrests. Others asked why it mattered now. Survivors of forced relocations watched from their apartments, recognition dawning, their stories validated too late to change outcomes, but not too late to matter. At the apartment where Anya died, new tenants learned the history and moved out within weeks, unable to reconcile daily life with what had occurred on those tiles. Flowers appeared again at the building's entrance, this time with a note bearing no signature, just a sentence. She was right. Inside the precinct, the mood was restrained. There was no celebration, no sense of victory. Solving a cold case this old felt less like triumph and more like excavation, the unearthing of something that would never be whole again. Investigators reviewed what remained unresolved, the names they couldn't touch, the decisions they couldn't reverse. Justice, they understood, was partial by nature, shaped by timing as much as truth. Yet something had shifted. The case had broken the illusion that time alone could absolve, that systems could outlast scrutiny indefinitely. Anya Keller's work, interrupted violently, had resumed through others, her questions carried forward by people who had never met her but now understood the cost of asking them. As the first court dates were set and appeals prepared, the city absorbed the story into its layered consciousness, another chapter in a history defined by exposure and reckoning. The cold case was no longer cold, but it was not closed either. Its resolution was uneven, its impact diffuse, its lessons uncomfortable. And in that discomfort lay its power. Because the past had been forced into the open, not as a single crime solved neatly at last, but as a reminder that some secrets endure not because they are hidden well, but because confronting them demands more courage than most systems are designed to allow. The courtroom did not feel like an ending. It felt like a corridor, narrow and echoing, a place you passed through on the way to somewhere else, and as proceedings began, the city outside followed with the distracted attention reserved for things that are both important and exhausting. The security contractor sat at the defense table smaller than he had in the interrogation room, suit ill-fitting, eyes fixed on nothing, while the prosecution laid out a narrative that tried, imperfectly, to compress decades of silence into hours of testimony. They spoke of duty and deviation, of an assignment that slid into catastrophe, of a man who had been told to retrieve papers and instead carried out an act that ended a life, but the words struggled to hold the weight of what had happened. Because language falters when intent is shared but responsibility is diluted. The defense leaned heavily on that dilution, on panic, on accident, on a system that had failed everyone involved. It was persuasive enough to unsettle certainty without erasing guilt. Witnesses took the stand one by one, their memories sharp in some places, eroded in others. Former tenants described the fear they had lived with, the quiet compliance learned early. The retired administrator spoke of administrative necessity, of files moved and lost in chaos, of nothing personal ever intended. The journalist testified last, his notebook projected onto a screen, the fragments now contextualized, the warnings Anya had given him sounding prophetic in retrospect. He did not dramatize her. He did not sanctify her. He described her as precise, cautious, determined, a woman who believed facts could protect her. Outside the courtroom, reactions fractured along familiar lines. Some saw the trial as overdue justice. Others dismissed it as symbolic theater, too little, too late. Opinion columns debated the value of reopening wounds, whether exposing the past helped heal or merely reopened old fractures. The city argued with itself, as it always had, and in that argument Anya's name was spoken more than it had been in 30 years. Behind the scenes, the investigation did not stop. It rarely does. New information surfaced as protections weakened, as people reassessed loyalties they had carried out of habit rather than conviction. A former aide came forward with correspondence copied before being destroyed. A minor official admitted to rerouting inquiries under pressure. Each revelation filled in a gap, but also exposed another edge, another unanswered question. One such question centered on the brother. His testimony was brief, controlled, but its implications rippled outward. He acknowledged finding documents among Anya's belongings. He maintained that he had destroyed them. Prosecutors challenged him gently, aware of public sympathy, but the doubt lingered, fueled by inconsistencies no one could conclusively resolve. Did he burn everything? Did he keep something back? Had he shared it with someone before fear closed in? The answers mattered less legally than morally, and moral ambiguity has a way of surviving verdicts. The partial DNA evidence, once a breakthrough, became a point of contention, its limitations exposed under cross-examination. Experts disagreed on probabilities. Defense attorneys emphasized uncertainty. The jury listened, faces tightening as complexity replaced clarity. In the end, the conviction rested not on science alone but on corroboration, on the convergence of testimony and circumstance, on a picture that made sense even if its edges blurred. The verdict, when it came, was neither shocking nor satisfying. Guilty on reduced charges. Acquitted on others. Sentencing scheduled months later. The security contractor bowed his head, not in remorse, but in calculation, already shifting toward appeals. The men higher up never sat in that room. Their consequences had already occurred, quieter, negotiated, dispersed. For the Keller family, closure proved elusive. The mother attended the verdict, left before sentencing, later telling a friend that hearing legal conclusions about her daughter's death felt like listening to strangers discuss weather. The brother withdrew again, his relief incomplete, his guilt unresolved. He declined further interviews. He moved apartments. He tried, unsuccessfully, to return to anonymity. Public interest surged and then receded, as it always does. Another scandal emerged. Another trial. Another distraction. The cold case label faded from headlines, replaced by procedural updates that only specialists followed. Yet something fundamental had changed. The archive where Anya had worked instituted new transparency policies. Independent reviews were launched into historical housing practices. Survivors of forced relocations were invited to testify, to have their stories recorded officially at last. In quiet moments, investigators reflected on what had been achieved and what had not. They had identified a hand that struck the blow. They had exposed a network that enabled it. They had not, and likely would never, fully account for the culture that made it possible. That culture did not belong to one era or ideology. It belonged to any system that prioritized stability over truth. Anya Keller's apartment was renovated again, the kitchen reconfigured, tiles replaced, traces erased as thoroughly as possible. New tenants moved in, unaware or unwilling to ask. Life continued, as it must, layered over what came before. Only the building's old residents remembered the night when police lights painted the walls and the radio played on without its listener. Years later, A university seminar examined the case as an example of transitional justice, of the limits of accountability in periods of rapid change. Students debated hypotheticals. Professors cited precedents. Anya's name appeared on slides, a footnote elevated to a case study. The distance of time made analysis easier, safer. But for those who had been close enough to feel the heat when the embers flared back to life, the case never fully cooled again. It lingered in professional instincts, in hesitations before closing files, in the awareness that archives are not neutral and silence is rarely accidental. The trial ended, the appeals began, and Berlin absorbed another layer of its complicated past, not as a resolved chapter, but as a reminder. Some truths arrive late. Some justice arrives incomplete. And some names, once spoken aloud after years of quiet, refused to return to obscurity, echoing instead through the corridors they were meant to haunt. The appeal slowed everything down the way thick fog slows traffic, not by stopping movement entirely, but by forcing it into caution, into second-guessing, and during that pause the case took on a strange afterlife, no longer driven by investigators, but by what it had stirred loose. Files once sealed were requested by historians. Survivors began finding one another. Journalists returned to leads they had abandoned decades earlier, this time with names they could print and patterns they could defend. The murder had been addressed partially, but the ecosystem that produced it was still breathing. In the background, something else was happening, something quieter and more destabilizing. Copies of documents began to surface in unexpected places. Not originals, not complete sets, but fragments that aligned too cleanly to be coincidence. A scanned memo appeared in a local history forum, posted anonymously, then deleted within hours. A former tenant produced a photocopy of a relocation order with handwritten annotations that matched those in Anya's notebook. An academic received an envelope containing nothing but a list of names already known to investigators, except for one added at the bottom, underlined twice. The question investigators had tried to avoid returned with force. If Anya's documents had truly been destroyed, where was this material coming from? Someone somewhere had kept something. Someone had decided now was the moment to let it slip. They went back to the brother. Again. He did not hide his irritation this time, did not soften his tone for sympathy. He insisted he had burned everything, insisted he had wanted it gone, insisted that dragging this out served no one. When asked about the newly surfaced copies, he shook his head, said they weren't his problem, said he was done paying for other people's crimes. His anger felt genuine. His certainty did not. Investigators considered another possibility, one more uncomfortable than betrayal or fear, that Anya herself had planned for failure, that she had anticipated interference, anticipated erasure, and quietly seeded copies in places she trusted, people she believed would wait until it was safe. It fit her temperament. It fit the archivist's instinct to preserve redundantly. It reframed her death not as the end of a story, but as the interruption of a process already in motion. That idea gained traction when a former colleague came forward, a woman who had worked alongside Anya in the early 90s and had stayed silent out of habit rather than malice. She admitted that Anya had asked her to hold onto a sealed envelope shortly before her death, told her not to open it unless something happened. After the murder, the colleague panicked, moved apartments, forgot about the envelope entirely. She found it years later while cleaning out a storage unit, unopened, and then, watching the trial unfold on television, realized what it might contain. Inside were summaries, not evidence, but directions, a map of sorts pointing to where full records could be reconstructed, cross-referenced, proven. Investigators followed those directions carefully, aware that each step risked alerting someone still invested in silence. Some locations yielded nothing. Others yielded enough. The appeal hearing itself was procedural, dense, untheatrical. Arguments about intent, about admissibility, about whether a push constituted recklessness or inevitability. The judges listened. They asked questions. They recessed. When they returned, the sentence was adjusted slightly, reduced by months, not years. It was a legal outcome that satisfied no one completely and infuriated almost everyone a little. Public reaction flared briefly, then fragmented. For some, the reduced sentence confirmed suspicions that the system protected its own. For others, it was evidence of fairness, of restraint, of law functioning as designed. The debate said more about the present than the past. What mattered more, though fewer noticed it, was what happened next. A parliamentary inquiry was announced, narrow in scope but symbolically significant, aimed at examining transitional property practices. It had limited power. It promised no prosecutions. But it compelled testimony under oath, and oaths have a way of changing tone even when consequences are mild. Men who had never expected to speak publicly about their roles found themselves seated behind microphones, their words recorded, archived, made permanent. Some minimized, some deflected, some, unexpectedly, confessed to things that had weighed on them for years, not crimes exactly, but decisions that had harmed people who had never been more than files to them. The inquiry did not deliver justice in any traditional sense. It delivered something messier, acknowledgement. Anya Keller's name appeared repeatedly in those sessions, sometimes spoken with irritation, sometimes with grudging respect. She was described as persistent, inconvenient, thorough. No one called her reckless. No one called her careless. Those absences mattered. In private, investigators wrestled with the last unresolved thread, the missing shoe. It remained unaccounted for, a small, stubborn anomaly that refused to resolve into metaphor. They revisited theories, taken accidentally, removed deliberately, a souvenir, a mistake. None satisfied. It was the kind of detail that haunted professionals, not because it changed outcomes, but because it suggested a human moment they could never reconstruct. Years passed in increments that felt smaller than they were. Careers shifted. Retirements loomed. The case receded into institutional memory, cited occasionally, taught sometimes, referenced when new detectives asked about the limits of reopening old files. It became a cautionary tale, not about failure, but about cost. Then, without warning, another death complicated everything. One of the men named repeatedly in documents, never charged, never tried, was found dead in his home, officially of natural causes. Within days, rumors spread. Suicide, heart attack, stress. Nothing suspicious enough to trigger an investigation, except that among his effects was a locked drawer, and inside it a single shoe. The shoe matched the description. Same size, same wear pattern, same manufacturer discontinued in the early 90s. Forensic analysis could not conclusively prove it was Anya's. Time had erased too much. But the coincidence was suffocating. The discovery reignited attention, forced officials to address questions they had hoped would fade. How had he come to possess it? Why keep it? Why never dispose of it? His family refused interviews. His lawyer issued a statement expressing shock. The inquiry had no jurisdiction over the dead. The truth, again, slipped just out of reach. For those who had lived inside the case, the shoe was not proof. It was punctuation. It suggested a private reckoning, a relic of involvement no legal process had ever illuminated. It reinforced what the investigation had hinted at all along, that the crime was not the work of one man alone, but of a circle that shared responsibility unevenly and lived with it differently. In the end, there was no final press conference, no declaration of closure. The Berlin 1992 cold case settled into an uneasy state between solved and unresolved, its central act accounted for, its context only partially exposed. But something irreversible had occurred. The silence had been broken. The archive had been disturbed. The past had been forced to answer questions it had avoided by outlasting those who asked them. And for a city built on layers, on ruins and reconstructions, on forgetting and remembering in equal measure, that disturbance mattered. Because it reminded Berlin and anyone listening closely that history does not stay buried simply because time passes. It waits. It adapts. And sometimes, when someone like Anya Keller insists on reading what was never meant to be read, it comes back demanding to be acknowledged, one fragment at a time. After the shoe, the case stopped behaving like history and started acting like a warning. It no longer waited politely in files or hearings or footnotes. It intruded. Conversations stalled when certain names were spoken. Invitations were declined without explanation. Doors that had opened cautiously during the inquiry closed again, slower this time, heavier, as if people had learned exactly how much truth they could tolerate before retreating. The man who died with the shoe in his drawer was buried quietly. No public reckoning followed, no posthumous investigations strong enough to disturb his estate. Officially, nothing connected him to Anya Keller. Unofficially, everyone who had worked the case understood what that shoe represented. Not evidence, but ownership, the private acknowledgement of a role never admitted aloud. Guilt does not always confess. Sometimes it collects souvenirs. Investigators revisited his correspondence anyway, parsing years of letters and emails for patterns, for echoes of the language they had seen before. They found references to loose ends, to objects that should not resurface, to keeping things safe until it's no longer necessary. The phrasing was vague enough to be defensible, specific enough to chill. None of it crossed the legal threshold. All of it crossed the human one. The parliamentary inquiry concluded with a report thick enough to look authoritative and cautious enough to offend everyone equally. It acknowledged wrongdoing without assigning blame. It recommended reforms already underway. It expressed regret. Regret became the official tone of the aftermath, a word that required no action and no memory beyond the page. Yet outside official channels, the case continued to ripple. A small exhibition opened at a local museum, focused on archival work in transitional periods. Anya Keller's name appeared on a wall, not as a victim, but as a professional, an archivist whose diligence had outlived her. Her notebooks were displayed behind glass, pages open to annotations that once seemed mundane and now felt prophetic. Visitors lingered longer than expected. Some cried. Some argued. Some left quickly, unsettled by the idea that history depends on people who rarely get statues. In academic circles, the case became shorthand. A Keller situation, professors said, meaning an instance where documentation threatens power. Theses were written. Debates sharpened. The ethics of exposure were dissected endlessly, whether Anya had been right to pursue the truth alone, whether institutions should protect individuals who uncover dangerous histories, whether protection is ever real or just another promise that expires under pressure. The brother avoided all of it. He moved again, changed jobs, stopped responding to journalists entirely. Those who knew him said he carried the case like a weight that shifted but never lifted. He had loved his sister. He had feared what she was becoming involved in. Both could be true. Both had consequences. Years later, when he was finally persuaded to speak privately with a researcher, he said something that never made it into print. He said Anya had once told him that archives were not about the past, they were about the future, about what people would be allowed to claim had happened. He said he wished he had listened better. He said he wished fear hadn't felt so practical at the time. The security contractor served his sentence quietly, released early for good behavior, returning to a life stripped of purpose and reputation. He never gave another interview. He never retracted his statement. In rare moments of candor, he told a prison counselor that the worst part was not the act itself, but the certainty that if he hadn't done it, someone else would have. That belief, more than the crime, haunted him. Berlin continued to change, relentlessly, as cities do. Buildings rose where others had been erased. Neighborhoods reinvented themselves. New residents learned old streets without learning their stories. The past did not disappear. It was simply paved over, its outlines visible only to those who knew how to look. Occasionally, someone would send a message to the investigators who had worked the case, an email or a letter containing a recollection, a name, a document scanned and shared late at night. Most led nowhere. A few confirmed what was already suspected. None reopened proceedings. The machinery of justice had moved on. The machinery of memory had not. On the anniversary of Anya Keller's death, someone continued to leave flowers near the building where she died. Not every year. Not predictably. Sometimes a single stem. Sometimes a full arrangement. No card. No explanation. The gesture persisted without audience, a private act repeated long after its meaning was understood. The cold case label remained, stubborn and imprecise. Officially, the murder had been resolved. Unofficially, everyone involved knew the resolution was incomplete by design. Cold cases rarely thaw evenly. They melt in patches, revealing some truths while leaving others frozen in place. In a quiet moment near the end of her career, one of the lead investigators returned to the archive where Anya had worked. He requested access to the same section she had once handled, not because he expected to find anything new, but because he wanted to understand the physical space that had shaped her instincts. He stood between shelves, running a finger along spines labeled with years and codes, feeling the weight of accumulated decisions. He realized then that Anya's real legacy was not the case that bore her name, but the disruption she had caused, the refusal to let records remain inert. She had forced movement, forced reaction, forced exposure. Even in death, she had done what archivists are trained to do, make information available to those willing to confront it. The city outside hummed, unaware of the small reckoning happening in that aisle. Trams passed. Voices echoed. Life went on. And that was the final, unresolved tension of the story. A woman killed for uncovering truths that threatened stability. A system that conceded just enough to survive. A case labeled solved that continued to unsettle those who touched it. The Berlin 1992 cold case did not end with a verdict or a report or a burial. It ended, if it ended at all, with an understanding that some crimes are not meant to be closed cleanly because they are not singular acts but symptoms, and treating the symptom does not cure the disease. So the file rests now, neither active nor dormant, its edges worn from handling, its contents known and yet incomplete. It waits, as all such cases do, not for justice in the abstract, but for the next person willing to open a box, read what was never meant to be read, and accept the cost of refusing to look away. Time did not close the case so much as stretch it thin, pulling it across years until it became part of the city's background noise, present but rarely focused on, and yet for those who had lived inside it, who had watched evidence surface and vanish, who had felt the quiet pressure of unseen resistance, it never fully receded. It followed them into other investigations, into unrelated files, into moments when a detail felt too neatly explained, when an answer arrived too quickly to be trusted. The appeal process ended without spectacle. The final ruling was issued in careful language, confirming what had already been accepted in practice. The conviction would stand. The sentence would not change. The matter was legally resolved. The announcement passed through the news cycle like a formality, reported briefly, contextualized minimally, then displaced by the next urgency. For the public, the story had reached its limit. For the case itself, that limit felt artificial. Inside the archives, subtle changes took root. Requests for restricted materials increased. Oversight committees met more frequently. Protocols were rewritten with the cautious optimism of institutions that had learned something without fully admitting why. Younger archivists spoke of Anya Keller as a kind of professional myth, a warning and an aspiration intertwined. Her name carried weight not because of how she died, but because of what she had tried to do alone. One of the investigators, now nearing retirement, began organizing his personal notes, sorting through boxes accumulated over decades. In one folder marked simply Berlin, he found copies he had made for himself during the Keller investigation, documents that had never entered the official file because they hadn't met evidentiary standards. Marginal notes, cross-references, names that appeared once and never again. He considered discarding them, then didn't. He understood better now than he had then that preservation was an act, not a default. Elsewhere, the journalist who had once hidden his notebook finally published a long-form piece, not a revelation but a reflection, tracing the arc of the case alongside the arc of the city. He avoided accusations he could not prove. He focused instead on mechanisms, on how silence functions, on how transitional moments create opportunities not just for progress but for continuity disguised as change. The article circulated quietly, shared more often than it was discussed, its impact cumulative rather than explosive. The Keller brother read it and recognized sentences Anya might have underlined. He did not reach out. He did not correct anything. He folded the paper carefully and kept it. In private moments, he rehearsed conversations he could never have, answers he would never give. His life had narrowed into routines that kept the past at bay, but it pressed in anyway, reminding him that survival and responsibility are not mutually exclusive, just unevenly distributed. The building where Anya died changed ownership again. Renovations erased the last traces of the old layout. The radio, long since discarded, existed only in photographs. New residents passed through the stairwell without noticing the way sound carried, the way voices lingered. The city layered itself over the site with the confidence of repetition, trusting that enough time would make meaning optional. And yet, occasionally, someone would pause there, usually someone old enough to remember, and look up at the windows, counting floors, recalling the night when the street had filled with light and speculation. Memory resisted redevelopment in small, stubborn ways. The case continued to surface in unexpected contexts. A law school seminar debated the admissibility of delayed evidence. A documentary filmmaker requested interviews that were mostly declined. A graduate student requested access to sealed files and was denied, then requested again and was granted partial access, a small shift that would have been unthinkable years earlier. Change did not announce itself. It accumulated. One evening, long after the last legal document had been filed, an envelope arrived at the archive with no return address. Inside was a single photocopied page, a housing directive from 1978, stamped, annotated, familiar. At the bottom, in handwriting that matched Anya's notes, was a question mark.
No explanation.
No demand, just a prompt. Archivists debated what to do with it. They logged it. They scanned it. They stored it according to protocol. But the page unsettled them, not because it revealed something new, but because it suggested that the story was still circulating, still incomplete, still capable of interruption. Someone out there remembered. Someone out there was paying attention. The investigators were informed. They discussed reopening aspects of the inquiry, then decided against it. Not because it wasn't warranted, but because they recognized the limits of what reopening could achieve. Justice had been approximated. Truth had been partially illuminated. Pushing further might expose more, but it would also risk collapsing what fragile acknowledgement already existed. The decision was pragmatic. It was also unsatisfying. Anya Keller's grave remained modest, visited occasionally by people who had never known her. Flowers appeared, disappeared. Stones were rearranged. Someone left a note once, folded small, containing a single line. Your work continues. No one claimed it. No one needed to. In the end, the case resisted a single moral. It did not offer redemption or catharsis. It offered a landscape shaped by compromise, by courage that arrived unevenly, by truth that emerged late and at cost. The Berlin 1992 cold case became a reference not for what it solved, but for what it exposed about the nature of exposure itself. It showed how violence can be procedural, how murder can occur not in a moment of fury, but as the byproduct of an instruction softened by distance. It showed how families absorb shock in different ways, how fear masquerades as protection, how silence can be an inheritance. It showed how institutions adapt to survive scrutiny without surrendering power. And it showed something else, something quieter. That even when justice is partial, disruption matters. That a single person, working patiently in the margins, can force a system to react, to reveal itself, to leave traces it cannot fully erase. The file, officially closed, unofficially restless, returned to its place on the shelf. Its spine bore a label that no longer captured its weight. It would be pulled again, someday, by someone who recognized a familiar pattern, a familiar code, a familiar resistance. Because cases like this do not end. They wait. They settle. They listen. And when the conditions align, when the right question is asked in the wrong place at the wrong time, they open again, reminding everyone involved that the past is not something you outrun, only something you postpone. In the final accounting, What remained was not a verdict, but a residue, a fine layer of unease that settled over everything the case had touched, and years after the last motion was filed, the last interview declined, the last headline archived. Berlin carried that residue the way it carries so many others, invisibly, until the light hits at the right angle. The city had learned, again, how easily violence can be procedural, how a death can be produced not by hatred, but by alignment, by people agreeing not to ask one question too many. The archive continued to function, orderly and fluorescent, but something in it had shifted. New generations of archivists handled boxes with a different posture, aware now that documents were not passive, that what they preserved could wound, could destabilize, could cost someone their life. Training manuals were updated. Ethics seminars added a case study that never named Anya Keller outright, but everyone knew. Her presence hovered in the margins, like a watermark only visible once you knew where to look. The investigator, who had first reopened the file, retired quietly. On his last day, he walked the corridors without ceremony, past offices that no longer recognized him, carrying nothing but a thin folder he had permission to keep. Inside were notes, not evidence, reflections written late at night when certainty had been scarce. He left the building without turning back, understanding that some stories do not conclude, they transfer, moving from one set of hands to another, waiting for attention to sharpen again. The journalist's piece continued to circulate, resurfacing whenever debates flared about transparency, about reckoning, about whether exposure is an obligation or a choice. Readers recognized themselves in it, not as heroes or villains, but as participants in systems that reward quiet compliance. The article never named a single villain. That omission angered some. It was deliberate. The brother lived with the consequences of proximity, with the knowledge that survival had required decisions that could not be unmade. In later years, he volunteered at a local historical society, quietly, anonymously, helping digitize records no one else wanted to touch. It was not redemption. It was maintenance. He understood now what Anya had meant about the future, about what people would later be allowed to claim had happened. The building on the narrow street remained unremarkable, one among thousands, its stairwell echoing with ordinary sounds. Yet occasionally someone would pause at the door, an old resident, a former investigator, a stranger who had read too much, and feel the familiar tightening in the chest, the sense that something had occurred there that refused to stay put. Memory does not need permission. No official body ever declared the matter fully closed. They declared it resolved to the extent possible. That phrase entered reports and stayed there, a hedge against finality. It acknowledged limits without naming them, an institutional shrug dressed as wisdom. In classrooms, the case became an example of transitional justice, with an asterisk. In lectures, it was cited as proof that time complicates accountability without erasing it. Students asked whether Anya had been reckless. Professors asked whether caution would have saved her. The debate never settled, because it could not, because it asked the wrong question. The right one was simpler and harder: who benefits when nothing is done? On the anniversary of her death, the flowers appeared again, placed with care, removed without comment. No one claimed responsibility. No one needed to. The act itself was the message, repeated into permanence. The cold case label persisted, stubborn as a scar, even as officials insisted the core crime had been addressed. Language struggled to contain what the case had become, a hybrid of solved and unresolved, exposed and obscured. It existed now as a reference point, a quiet threat to complacency, a reminder that archives are not neutral and silence is rarely accidental. And somewhere, perhaps in a drawer not yet opened, perhaps in a memory not yet loosened by age, something else remained, another fragment, another confirmation waiting. The city did not need it to function. The system did not need it to survive. But the truth has never depended on need. It depends on friction, on people willing to accept consequence in exchange for clarity. Anya Keller had been one of those people. She had not set out to become a symbol. She had not sought confrontation. She had followed a line of ink across paper until it led somewhere it was not meant to go. That was enough. In the end, Her story did not resolve into comfort or cautionary triumph. It resolved into awareness, the quiet kind that alters behavior without announcing itself. It taught those who paid attention that the past is not inert, that records remember even when people prefer not to, that stability built on omission eventually demands payment. The file rests where it always has, its spine worn, its contents known and incomplete. It does not sleep. It listens. And in a city that has learned, repeatedly, that forgetting is never permanent, that listening matters. Because some cases are not meant to close. They are meant to endure, to sit just beneath the surface, reminding anyone willing to look that truth does not fade with time. It accumulates, and when it finally surfaces, it does not ask whether the world is ready. If the story truly ended where everyone agreed it should, then this part would not exist, because nothing unsettles institutions more than what comes after closure, the faint continuation that refuses to respect narrative boundaries. Years after the file was marked resolved to the extent possible, after the appeals were exhausted and the attention moved elsewhere, the case returned in a form no one expected, not as accusation or discovery, but as pattern. It began with a routine digitization project, the kind that rarely produces anything more dramatic than mislabeled folders and faded ink. A junior archivist, new enough not to carry institutional instincts yet, flagged an anomaly while cross-referencing housing directives from the late 1970s. A code appeared that should not have survived beyond a specific department, a code Anya Keller had circled once in her notes, a code believed to have been retired and purged. It appeared again, quietly, in a record dated 3 years after her death. The archivist hesitated before reporting it, aware of the story attached to certain questions, but curiosity outweighed caution. When the record was expanded, it revealed a correction notice, administrative and signed, rerouting an inquiry away from public review. The phrasing was familiar, the syntax unmistakable. Someone had been using the old language long after the system that created it was supposed to be gone. The discovery was escalated discreetly. Former investigators were consulted informally. No one spoke of reopening the case outright, but the discomfort was immediate. The implication was not that Anya Keller's death had been mishandled, but that her work had been interrupted midstream, and that the interruption had not stopped the process she was tracing. Further examination revealed a cluster of similar corrections scattered across years, each minor, each defensible in isolation, each pointing away from scrutiny. The names attached were not the same as before. They were younger. They belonged to people who had inherited roles rather than histories, people who knew procedures without knowing their origins. Continuity, without memory. It became clear that the system Anya had exposed had not survived intact. It had fragmented, adapted, shed its most visible skin. But certain reflexes remained. Certain habits persisted. And someone, somewhere, still understood the value of keeping specific truths unassembled. The archivist who found the anomaly asked a simple question that had not been asked in years. What if the case was never about preventing exposure of the past, but about preserving a method? The question unsettled everyone who heard it, because it shifted responsibility from individuals to inheritance, from villains to culture. No task force was convened. No press release drafted. Instead, a quiet review began, framed as a technical audit, its mandate intentionally narrow. Those involved understood the risk of naming the wrong thing too loudly. They worked in margins, in metadata, in revision histories that revealed more than the documents themselves ever had. One name surfaced repeatedly, not prominent, not powerful, but persistent, attached to approvals that smoothed irregularities before they could attract attention. The person was mid-career, respected, politically cautious, unaware, perhaps, of the lineage of the tools being used. When approached, they expressed genuine confusion, insisted the codes were inherited, templates copied forward because they worked. It had never occurred to them to question why. That explanation landed harder than any denial. It suggested that Anya Keller had not been killed to protect a single secret, but to preserve ignorance, to ensure that processes continued without examination. It suggested that the most effective form of silencing was not fear, but normalization. The former investigator, long retired, was asked for perspective. He read the new material slowly, then closed the file and said something that would not appear in any report. This is what she was trying to stop.
Not a crime.
A habit. The archivist returned to Anya's notebooks, now fully cataloged, and noticed something no one had remarked on before. In the margins of one page, next to a list of codes, Anya had written a single sentence, almost an aside. Watch what survives transition. It was not a warning. It was an instruction. That sentence became the quiet axis of the review. Investigators traced how certain procedures endured while others vanished, how language evolved to maintain effect without triggering alarms. None of it constituted a crime. All of it constituted continuity. There was no appetite for confrontation this time. Too much time had passed. Too many hands had touched the process without malicious intent. The findings were summarized, anonymized, folded into recommendations that emphasized training, transparency, and historical literacy. The report circulated internally. Externally, nothing changed. And yet, something subtle did. The archivist who had asked the question stayed. Others followed. They began to annotate records differently, to flag inherited language, to ask why certain phrases persisted. Oversight became less procedural, more interpretive. The work slowed. Slowing was the point. Anya Keller's name did not appear in any of this. It did not need to. Her influence was structural now, embedded in caution, in refusal to accept that efficiency is neutral. Years later, when asked in an interview why archival work mattered, the junior archivist, now no longer junior, answered without hesitation. They spoke of responsibility across time, of how systems remember even when people forget, of how silence reproduces itself unless interrupted. They did not mention a murder. They did not mention a cold case. But those listening closely heard the echo. The Berlin 1992 cold case remained officially resolved, its narrative complete. Unofficially, it had evolved into something else entirely, a reference not for violence, but for vigilance, for the understanding that truth does not only need defenders in moments of crisis, but custodians in moments of calm. That was the part no headline captured. That was the part Anya Keller never lived to see. And in that way, the story continued, not forward, not backward, but outward, diffusing into practice, into habit, into the quiet decisions made by people who had learned, finally, that the most dangerous question is not who committed the act, but what was allowed to continue once everyone stopped watching. What followed was not escalation but sedimentation, the slow settling of understanding after disturbance, when what has been shaken does not collapse but rearranges itself into a new, uneasy stability. The audit concluded without incident, the recommendations filed, the language carefully neutral, but the people who had participated carried something different back to their desks, a sensitivity to recurrence, a sense that repetition is rarely accidental. They began to notice how often institutions mistake longevity for legitimacy, how easily inherited procedures masquerade as necessity. In the months that followed, a quiet pattern emerged. Requests for clarification increased. Footnotes multiplied. Marginal questions appeared in internal drafts, small notations that slowed approvals just enough to force reconsideration. It was not resistance. It was friction. And friction, in systems designed for smooth passage, changes outcomes. The archivist who had first flagged the anomaly began teaching a workshop for new hires, unofficial at first, then sanctioned, focused not on policy but on provenance, on tracing not just what a document says but where its language comes from. They used anonymized examples, never mentioning Anya Keller, never invoking the case directly, yet every exercise circled the same principle. Continuity is not neutral. Elsewhere, outside the archive, the case continued to resonate in less predictable ways. A documentary filmmaker released a short piece online, stripped of narration, composed entirely of images of Berlin's buildings and the dates they changed hands, captions minimal, connections implied. It did not go viral. It endured. It was shared quietly among those who recognized what it was pointing at, a visual index of transition and continuity overlapping in plain sight. The Keller brothers saw it by accident, late one night, and recognized a building he had passed 1,000 times without thinking. He watched the clip twice, then closed his laptop and sat in silence longer than he intended. The past no longer felt like something behind him. It felt adjacent. He began sorting through his own belongings, not looking for documents, not hoping to find absolution, but driven by a need he could not articulate. In a box he had not opened in years, he found a notebook he did not recognize. Inside were his sister's handwriting, sparse but unmistakable, notes copied quickly, references without explanation. He did not remember keeping it. He did not remember choosing not to destroy it. Memory, he realized, protects us from knowing exactly when we decide to live with something unfinished. He did not contact authorities. He did not contact journalists. He contacted the archive. Anonymously. He asked whether there was a protocol for donating materials, without attribution. There was. The notebook arrived weeks later in a padded envelope with no return address. It was catalogued as unknown provenance. It joined the collection quietly. The archivists who handled it understood immediately what it was. Not proof. Not revelation. A connective tissue. It confirmed paths already traced, filled gaps already suspected. It did not change conclusions.
It deepened them.
For the retired investigator, informed discreetly, the notebook provoked a complicated relief. Not because it advanced the case, but because it suggested intention where he had once feared only tragedy. Anya had not been reckless. She had been systematic. She had anticipated loss. She had planned for survival beyond herself. Publicly, nothing shifted. Privately, the understanding of the case matured. It was no longer framed as a murder that revealed corruption, but as an interruption in a longer struggle between documentation and discretion. The violence had been decisive. The resistance had been slower, quieter, and in some ways more durable. Years passed. The city absorbed new crises, new reckonings. Language evolved. Institutions adapted. And yet, every so often, a request would be denied with a reason that felt too familiar, a phrase too well-worn, and someone would pause, remember a workshop, remember a footnote, remember a question mark in the margin of a photocopy, and decide not to let it pass unquestioned. That was the legacy no one could measure. No metric captured the moments when someone chose delay over efficiency, inquiry over compliance. No report tallied the decisions that never became scandals because they were interrupted early. Anya Keller's name surfaced less often now, but when it did, it carried a different tone. Not tragedy. Not warning. Method. Her story had been absorbed into professional culture the way certain errors become safeguards, remembered not for pain but for instruction. The cold case, in this extended sense, had changed state. It no longer demanded resolution. It demanded attention. It existed as a lens through which other cases were viewed, other transitions examined. It had become a reference without a conclusion, a presence without an endpoint. And perhaps that was the only ending it could have had. Not closure, but continuation. Not justice fully realized, but harm partially prevented. Not silence broken once, but questioned repeatedly. Because the truth Anya Keller had approached and paid for approaching was not that systems commit crimes. It was that systems persist. And persistence, left unexamined, is how yesterday survives tomorrow. By the time anyone noticed the shift beyond the archive, it had already taken root elsewhere, in offices that did not consider themselves custodians of history, in departments that believed their work was too practical, too current to be haunted. The language changed first, subtle edits and internal memos, phrases softened, references clarified, a growing discomfort with shortcuts that once passed without comment. It was not reform. It was hesitation. And hesitation, in systems accustomed to momentum, altered trajectories. A mid-level administrator in a housing authority flagged a directive for review not because it violated policy, but because it resembled something he had seen in a workshop years earlier, a pattern described without names, a method described without accusation. He hesitated, then escalated. The review found nothing actionable. It found something else instead, an assumption embedded so deeply it had never been articulated. The directive was revised. No one noticed, except the person who had stopped it. That was how the case continued now, not as spectacle, not as shock, but as interruption. It moved sideways through bureaucracies, appearing briefly in the minds of people who had never read the file, who did not know Anya Keller's face, but who had absorbed the lesson she left behind. The notebook donated anonymously became a quiet cornerstone. Scholars requested access, cautious, respectful. Its contents were dissected, contextualized, connected to other fragments scattered across collections. A map emerged, not of crimes, but of continuity, of how certain administrative reflexes survived political shifts, ideological reversals, even generational turnover. The map did not accuse. It described. That made it harder to dismiss. One scholar described it as infrastructural memory, the persistence of behavior long after justification has expired. The phrase circulated. It entered lectures, then papers, then policy discussions. It gave language to something many had sensed but never named. And once named, it could be challenged. The Keller brother attended one such lecture, sitting in the back, unrecognized. When the speaker referenced an unnamed archivist whose work had altered how institutions approach their own records, he felt a familiar tightening, not grief exactly, but proximity. He left before the applause, walking the long way home, understanding finally that his sister's absence had produced a presence he could not outrun. He began to speak, cautiously, in smaller settings, never publicly, never naming himself. He spoke about fear as a motivator, about how families participate in silence without realizing it, about the difference between protection and erasure. Those who listened did not know who he was. They did not need to. The truth carried its own authority now. In police circles, the case became a reference point for restraint. Younger detectives learned it as an example of how investigations can be constrained not by lack of evidence, but by excessive context, by forces that shape outcomes without leaving fingerprints. The lesson was not cynicism. It was patience. Watch for what resists examination. Ask why. The retired investigator, invited once to speak to a class, declined the podium and sat among the students instead. When asked afterward what he thought of the discussion, he said only that the case had taught him the difference between solving a crime and understanding it. One ends a file. The other never does. Outside these circles, Berlin continued its restless reinvention. New buildings rose. Old names disappeared. The city marketed itself as forward-looking, unburdened. And yet, beneath the surfaces, the sediment remained, layers of decision and omission, compacted by time. The case had not changed the city. It had taught some people how to read it. Every few years, a journalist would attempt to revive the story, pitching it as a forgotten murder, a scandal unresolved. Editors hesitated. The angle felt incomplete, the facts too diffuse, the villain indistinct. The story no longer fit the shape of outrage. It had become something quieter, more corrosive, less marketable. And so it receded again, not because it lacked importance, but because it resisted simplification. The flowers still appeared. Sometimes more, sometimes fewer. Once, a small card was left, blank except for a date that meant nothing to passers-by. Someone noticed. Someone remembered. Someone did not. The gesture remained ambiguous, like the case itself. The cold case, stretched far beyond its original boundaries, had lost the drama of discovery but gained something rarer: endurance. It existed now as a low-level signal, a reminder embedded in practice rather than memory. And perhaps that was the most unsettling outcome of all. Not that a murder went partially unresolved, but that its true consequence could not be contained by investigation or judgment. It had altered how people moved through systems, how they read instructions, how they weighed efficiency against consequence. Anya Keller had followed a line of ink until it revealed a structure. That structure, once glimpsed, could not be unseen. So the case continued, not as a file waiting to be reopened, but as a presence folded into routine, into caution, into the quiet refusal to let inherited silence pass unchallenged. In that way, the story did not end. It learned how to live. Eventually, the story reached a point where nothing dramatic happened for a long time, and that, too, became part of its meaning. Absence of spectacle created space. Space allowed habits to be examined without the pressure of crisis. The case receded from conversation, but not from consideration, a reference carried implicitly rather than invoked. People no longer said her name to signal alarm. They adjusted procedures instead. In one department, a routine review uncovered a discrepancy so small it would once have been corrected silently. This time, the reviewer paused. The correction would erase a trail. The pause delayed a deadline. The delay triggered a meeting. The meeting produced a question no one could answer cleanly. The discrepancy remained documented. Nothing collapsed.
Something changed.
That was how the influence moved now, not as confrontation, but as hesitation propagated across workflows, a distributed resistance to forgetting. The system adapted, not because it was forced, but because it was watched differently. The archivists began experimenting with transparency in limited forms, releasing contextual notes alongside records that had previously stood alone. The notes did not accuse. They explained lineage. They traced how language migrated from one era to another, how intent thinned into habit. Readers reacted unevenly. Some dismissed it as academic indulgence. Others recognized their own workplaces in the patterns described. A policy analyst cited the notes in a paper about institutional drift. The citation passed peer review. The idea gained credibility. Credibility invited replication. Suddenly, what had once been a single woman's private investigation had become a framework, stripped of biography, generalized enough to travel. The Keller brother followed this evolution from a distance. He stopped thinking of his sister's death as a singular event and began to see it as a rupture that redirected energy outward. The thought did not comfort him. It complicated grief. It suggested that meaning could accrue without consent. He learned to live with that. On an overcast afternoon, he visited the archive openly for the first time, requesting access under his own name. The archivist who assisted him did not react. Professional neutrality held. Inside the reading room, he encountered his sister's handwriting again, preserved without sentiment. He felt no revelation, only confirmation. She had been thorough. She had expected interruption. She had prepared for it. He left without speaking to anyone, carrying nothing with him. The act of showing up felt sufficient. Presence, he realized, was not always about assertion. Sometimes it was acknowledgement. Elsewhere, the former investigator received an invitation to contribute a short essay to a collection on unresolved justice. He declined again, then reconsidered. His contribution was brief, almost evasive, describing not the case but the sensation of knowing when a file is heavier than its contents. He wrote about weight, about resistance felt when closing a drawer. The editors accepted it without comment. Readers lingered over it longer than expected. The city continued to absorb new narratives. New scandals displaced old ones. Attention shifted. But beneath the noise, the habits seeded by the case endured. People asked for provenance. They questioned templates. They learned to read omissions as data. A graduate student, years removed from the original events, chose the case as a methodological example, not a subject of investigation. Her thesis argued that some truths exert influence precisely because they are incomplete, because they refuse closure, and thereby compel vigilance. The defense committee debated the claim, then approved it. The cold case label had become misleading. Cold suggested dormancy. This case was not dormant. It was diffuse. It existed in fragments of behavior, in the timing of decisions, in the refusal to accept inherited certainty. Anya Keller's life had been reduced in public memory to a photograph and a date. Her work had not. It continued without her name attached, embedded in processes she never saw, influencing outcomes she never imagined. That was the quiet paradox of the story. The violence meant to stop a line of inquiry had extended it. The attempt to preserve silence had taught others how to hear it. And so the case moved forward without momentum, sustained not by outrage but by attention, not by resolution but by practice. It did not demand belief. It required participation. In the spaces between headlines, between reforms, between remembered anniversaries, it persisted, shaping decisions that would never be traced back to a single night in 1992, but that nonetheless carried its imprint. Not a conclusion, not a victory, a condition.